everybody. Welcome to Your Money Map, sponsored by the Alliance for Lifetime Income. Thanks so much for joining me today. We have a fun show prepared for all of you. I was thinking this past weekend was my college reunion, actually, right here at Penn in Philadelphia, where I live. So it was very convenient for me to get to. But after the events wrapped, I shot a note to a close pal who wasn't there. And I said, "Where were you? I miss you." And she sent me a note back saying, "Well, I was in Paris and now we're in the south of France. And after that, we're heading to Copenhagen, and she's traveling with her daughter. She's going to meet her husband who's in another country for work." It sounds amazing because after all of this time, I think a lot of us are feeling this pent up urge to just go somewhere, to get on a plane, to travel, to relax in some locale or explore some locale that we've never seen before, or maybe to go back to somewhere that we've loved in the past. I know that when it comes to retirement, when we ask people, "What's your goal for retirement? What do you want to do in retirement?" Travel is always at or near the top of the list. And so today, we're going to dig into it. We're going to dig into travel trends. We're going to dig into how to make your travel dreams happen in retirement. And we're going to do it with the help of Mia Taylor. Mia Taylor is an award-winning journalist, and she has, over the past 2 decades, specialized in travel. With an award-winning career that has taken her around the world. She's worked for many online and print news organizations, for Fortune 500 companies, for high-tech startups, and she's currently a news editor at Dotdash Meredith Corporation, which is, for those of you who don't know it, America's largest digital and print publisher. She began as a staff editor for 4 of the company's most iconic brands, and now she is working, writing, and editing on topics related to travel in a big way, travel writ large. Mia, thanks so much for joining us and being with us today. We're so happy to have you.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So where are we in the world of travel right now? There are a lot of headlines about airports getting busy, about people planning vacations once again. But where are we, and how is the landscape different than it was before the pandemic?
It's a really interesting question because I just came back from my first trip abroad since the pandemic happened. I went to Turks and Caicos, and so for me it was a test run to see where we really were and how difficult it was to travel and all the test requirements and mask requirements. So the short answer is, people are traveling again in droves, and I just sort of gut checked this myself with some of my expert friends at TravelZoo and Scott's Cheap Flights. And, people are in mass booking flights now, and that's driving up prices in flights. So that's a big deal right now, that those cheaper prices we were used to seeing during the pandemic are all sort of changing. We're also at a place where you still have to test in a lot of locations to go to a lot of destinations and to return to the United States. That's still part of the travel journey. Masking, as you know, has been taken away from the requirements that are involved in taking a flight. But I'm going to Italy later this month, and you still have to wear masks there, in a lot of places. So the landscape is still very much one where you have to do a lot of research to be prepared to travel.
Are you getting a sense that the inflation pressures that we're feeling as consumers are slowing us down at all?
I haven't heard that. People, and this is just my take, but people have been dying to travel and they've saved money during the pandemic a lot of times because they weren't traveling and they had that money set aside. So while the cost of groceries is more expensive and gas is more expensive, and we all know that reality is challenging, I think people are still splurging on travel with that money they had set aside.
I am seeing some of our regular community join us for this conversation, which is fantastic. We are, of course, live on Facebook and LinkedIn. Let me say hi to Camilla and Terry and Michelle and everybody else who's watching out there. If you've got a question about travel, if you're wondering where you should go, if you're wondering about strategies for booking the cheapest flights, if you're thinking that you might want to use some of those airline points that you've piled up, but you're not sure about the best way to do it, or you want to dig into anything else travel related, Mia is here to help. We'll be happy to take your questions. So when we think about retirement, and we talk a lot about retirement on this show, people will say, I want to travel in retirement.
Mhm.
What do you think the draw is? And as you've looked at the way people actually do travel in retirement, what are you seeing?
So I think the draw is what we all sort of imagine, that we've worked so hard, for 50 years or whatever amount of time people choose to work. And then we just want to do things differently in our retirement and see the world and just step back and relax and do all the things we weren't able to do and have those life changing experiences and the memories that really matter more than making money and sitting in a cubicle, for sure. So I think that's what's driving it. I think the interesting thing, though, about making that happen during retirement is that many people don't prepare financially to realize that dream. And I was talking to some expert at Bank of America, and she pointed out a really interesting statistic to me, which is that, many people, 2/3 of retirees have not created that travel budget for post work life. And what's more, 58% indicate they don't even know how much money they're going to need each year to make their travel happen. So, what I'm seeing is people wanting to travel, but not financially thinking it through and preparing to do that.
So if you were to walk somebody through a step by step of figuring out what their travel budget should be, I mean, travel runs the gamut, right? Some people hit the road in an RV, some
Mhm.
people go in their cars and camp,
Mhm.
some people want to stay in the Four Seasons.
Right.
How do you figure out what a realistic budget for travel should look like and build one that's sustainable?
Yeah, and you really hit upon a bunch of really important points there, which is, first of all, you need to decide what kind of traveler you're going to be. Are you going to be the Four Seasons type of traveler, or are you going to be the glamping type of traveler or RV type of traveler? I mean, that's your baseline, honestly, is, thinking about that. And then you need to sort of structure, and again, this is a tip from one of the experts I interviewed, but structure, okay, here's this trip I want to take every year. Here's where I want to stay. Here's where I want to go. And here's how long I want to stay. And you can sort of build a rough budget once you have those three variables: where you want to go, where you want to stay, and how long. And then you can sort of map that out for a decade. Do that every year for 10 years. And then you have sort of a general ballpark of what you're going to need for 10 years of traveling.
Oh, that makes a ton of sense. And I'm a big fan of making sure I like having separate pots of money for
Same.
separate goals,
Yeah.
right? I mean, those of us who've been students of behavioral finance or behavioral economics know that this is a trick called mental accounting. That when you cordon off those various stashes of money, you're actually more likely to be successful in saving for those goals and more successful in keeping your hands off the money for random purchases. So I like that idea very much.
Yeah.
Linda wonders, and I'm not sure if you know the answer to this question, is there any sort of an app or a website for tracking whether you have to mask or whether you have to test
Yeah.
for particular countries?
Yes, I am so glad she asked that, because it was in my notes to share with your readers before the end of this, which is that Skyscanner has a live map, interactive map for every country. And so it let you go to Skyscanner and they have it right on their homepage. Here's our interactive map of country by country regulations and testing requirements and everything. It's a really dynamic and easy to use function.
Amazing. And Linda's also pointing out, Linda, you're very helpful today. Mint has a travel budget that works well. So if you're on Mint,
Oh,
you might be able to tap into their travel budget builder. She breaks it down to a daily amount to spend when traveling. That is
yeah.
that's a very helpful thing to do. I will remember when I was a young reporter in New York, there were books like New York on $10 a day, right? New
Yeah.
York, and in those days you actually could eat right for $10 a day.
Yeah.
So breaking it down is good. It's not Fly Scanner, it's Sky Scanner.
Guys.
SKY.
Yep.
SKY.
I think your tip, Jean, was also a good one about sort of your buckets of money. What I do in my Bank of America account is I have each account labeled for what it is. So I have travel savings right in the app. So I know, like, and I transfer money into my travel savings or, various other savings buckets. And they're all clearly labeled in the app. So I know what that money's for.
Yeah, very helpful. So as we're looking toward travel in the future, I mean, you mentioned air travel costs are going up. Are the costs of travel overall headed up? I mean, are we in an environment where we can expect it to cost much more in the future? What are the trends looking like?
So there's a couple answers to that question. And I think right now in the immediate future, airline tickets have gotten super expensive. And I talked to Scott's cheap flights the other day, and he said in April, there was an 18% increase month over month, which is the largest that he had seen in quite a long time. So yes, you have to budget more for airfare. I personally went on a California road trip vacation this past summer, and I was paying for 3-star hotels what I usually would pay for, much higher end hotels. So hotel prices have gone up, and that is also a product of pent up demand. People are still traveling and they're just dying to get out there. I spoke to folks at Travel Zoo who echoed the same thing, that people are really the demand is intense right now, and that's changing. But gas prices and inflation is also impacting airlines right now. So you need to know that, like, they're hurting too, the way we have been hurting at the pump. And so you're going to see that reflected in the ticket prices you're paying for.
One of the ways that I try to buy tickets is by using points and
Yeah.
using airline points. And I don't know about our listeners, or about you, but during the pandemic, I felt like I was shopping a lot online and I was going absolutely nowhere. So unlike a normal year where maybe I'll buy a couple of flights with my points just accumulated. And so now I'm sitting on these points
Uh-huh.
and simultaneously starting to read articles about the fact that you better use them. Now's the best time to use them. You're not sure if they're, we don't want them to get devalued in the future. What
Mhm.
was your points strategy? Do you use them for flights? Do you use them for hotels? Do you try to earn them all on one airline?
So a lot of things. I do try to earn them on a 2 or 3 key airlines that are my favorite airlines. That just makes the most sense to me, just sort of rack up the points consistently with those 2 or 3 airlines that I like to use. But it's really, you raised a couple of interesting points here, which is the points are, the way they're being valued is changing. So in the past, they weren't tied directly to the cost of the ticket, but now they are being tied to the cost of the ticket. So where in the past, a really expensive ticket in points might have been much cheaper, right? You wouldn't have had to use as many points. Now the airlines are correlating more directly. Here's what a ticket costs, and the points are going to equate to that, so that you're going to have to use more points to get that ticket. So that's an important thing to consider. And so the takeaway there is to really compare. Does it cost me less to buy this ticket directly? Can I get more? Can I go somewhere better with my points? Really shop around and look at the dollars and cents of whether using your points makes sense for that flight.
You raised the topic of glamping earlier, and in our pre-interview, you mentioned that you like glamping. I,
I
I'm
do.
I, I'm interested in exploring sort of these other ways to travel, right? Whether the less expensive ways to travel, whether we're talking about glamping, whether we're talking about renting an Airbnb. I mean, we've seen many different opportunities arise in the past couple of years. Can you
Right.
take us through sort of how the landscape has changed in that way, and what those of us who may want to travel on a budget should be on the hunt for?
I think it's a fascinating topic, honestly. And I shared with you in our pre discussion that my editor is legendary for share home swapping and using that as a way to travel the world inexpensively. And it is something that I personally would not have even thought of. But you can sign up for home swap websites and then make your home available while you want to go somewhere else, and that's a really cost effective way to go to France or Italy or any of those places that you might want to go to. And of course, Airbnb, that's been around forever. And I'm personally going to a wedding in Italy next, in 2 weeks, and we're renting via Airbnb, and 20 of our family members are staying in a house. And it's a beautiful, villa in Tuscany, which we couldn't individually probably have afforded hotel rooms equivalent to the level of this beautiful villa.
Wow, that's incredible. So how did you find it?
Searching on VRBO and Airbnb for villas in Italy. So, and it's got a pool, and we're going to have a chef come in, and these are the sort of experiential things where your family can be all together and you can enjoy still nice amenities like a pool at this villa, and the cost per person is far less than you would spend at like a nice resort.
Do you recommend VRBO or over Airbnb, or are there other sites that you like for tapping into individual homes? And if you're going this route, I often wonder about not having the protections of a hotel chain. Do you feel like you need to protect your trip in other ways, buy travel insurance that you wouldn't normally buy? Are there precautions that you need to take if you've decided that you're going to participate in this sort of travel?
I think the biggest concern I have, Gene, with booking through an Airbnb or VRBO is the cleaning standards, honestly, amid COVID. So, not so much the insurance. I always book travel insurance. That's just something that I do as a norm. But, you want to make sure that and Airbnb has been really good about this. Letting you know on the booking platform the cleaning standards that each property follows, pre-guest and post-guest. So I think that's the thing that you want to be thinking about in terms of protecting yourself when you're booking through a share economy kind of platform and not a Hyatt or a Hilton where you know very clearly what their standards are.
Have you found are there hidden costs that people don't expect when you're booking through an Airbnb or a VRBO? Are there I went to California early in the pandemic to see my son who lives out there.
Mm.
Booked an Airbnb because I wanted to have some space to move around and a little bit of outdoor space. And and it was fine. It was lovely, but it didn't have certain things that I needed, if I wanted to actually cook a meal, like in the kitchen, right? I went out and I remember buying a can opener and a corkscrew. So there you go. The two most important things in my right. I needed a can opener for dog food for his dog, and I needed a corkscrew for wine for me. So
Yes.
I just wonder if there are other expenses that you may run into as you're trying to pull together your budget.
I think that's a really good point. I have stayed at a number of Airbnbs over the years, and it is frustrating when you get there and you don't have a lot of the things that you need, like you mentioned, the corkscrew and the can opener. So yes, there's setup costs, right, for staying at these properties if they don't have, and you can look on their listings and see what they do include, which is a really good tip. I mean, if you're planning to do a lot of cooking at home and they don't have all the equipment in the kitchen that you're going to need, then you need to think through those costs. And I am in some ways a little bit of a hotel snob because I do like room service and I do like all the sort of fluff and perks that come with a hotel over an Airbnb or VRBO. So there are those amenities that you're going to have to add, or necessities. I guess they're not really amenities that you'll need to buy yourself. There's also cleanup costs. I mean, if you make excessive, if you get the house excessively dirty, a lot of the listings will tell you right up front, we're going to charge you X number of extra dollars for cleaning, if you do something above and beyond what we consider to be the norm in terms of usage of this house. There's damage costs. I mean, there's all those things. If you go to a hotel room and you leave the hotel room a little dirty, or there's, I don't know, something damaged, I don't know that you're going to pay those same kinds of fees that you definitely will pay via Airbnb.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really good point that you made about being a hotel snob because these days, if you are traveling, even if you're staying in a hotel, it's worth a call directly to the hotel to ask if there are services or facilities that are not in use because of COVID.
Mhm.
I was in a hotel last week in Chicago. I was there for a conference,
Mhm.
and typically they would have room service. They had no room service, and they haven't had it throughout the pandemic. And so if you wanted something, it was, Seamless or Grubhub.
Right. And that I encountered that myself in traveling. I've also been to a hotel and the spa only offered certain appointments, which was disappointing because I'm kind of a spa fan. But they weren't doing wraps or facials or things like that, only massages. And I'm not sure what the logic is in a COVID world between a massage and a facial and why you wouldn't offer one versus the other. But, if those things are important to you, you need to ask the questions.
As we think, oh, and we've got a couple of questions. Let me deal with these two, and then I'm going to move on to intergenerational travel. Websites for home swapping. You mentioned your editor is the queen of home swapping. Do you know what site she uses?
He uses, I think it's Love Home Swap. Yeah, yeah.
And then for glamping, we got a recommendation for Under Canvas.
Oh, I don't know that one. I know there's glamping.com, but Under Canvas, I'm not, sounds good.
Okay, we'll have to check those out. As
Yeah.
we look to retirement, I think people often think about spending more time with the people that they love, and that can lead to intergenerational travel, to going on trips or excursions where it's not just you and your kids or you and your parents, it's you and your parents and your kids.
Right.
And that takes an awful lot of planning.
Yeah.
What sort of tips and suggestions do you have for people who are looking to incorporate some of that into their lives?
That's a really timely tip because the trip I'm taking later this month to Italy involves my 80-year-old mother and my 9 going on 10-year-old son and myself. So you're talking about 3 very different travel styles. And I have literally spent the past month on Viator, which is a platform where you can book walking tours. And I'm really trying to find that middle ground between walking tours where, for an elderly person who can't walk that much or, that long, and a child who wants to really get out there and run around and have fun. So, I think when you're multi-generational traveling, you need to think ahead about what kind of tours or activities, even if you don't do tours, will please the entire age spectrum, and think about physical access and the amount of physical exertion and things like that, as well as the engagement level for the kids. So what I end up doing, for instance, was when we're in Florence, we're going to do a treasure hunt at the Uffizi Museum. Easy for my mom to walk around the museum, fun for my son, so that's an easy one. We're going to do gladiator classes for my son so she can watch him and have fun watching him, and he's going to learn all about what it was like to be a gladiator in Rome. So finding those middle ground things to do ahead of time is really key to make the trip successful for all ages.
My default before COVID, what for intergenerational travel, was always a cruise.
Right.
I always figured everybody could find something to do and then we could meet for dinner.
Mhm.
Um, what's your feeling at this point about cruising, and are there still bargains to be had?
Oh my gosh, yes. So I was just chatting with Gabe Sagley this morning from Travel Zoo about cruises, as it turns out, and he was talking about the fact that cruises haven't fully rebounded yet. So that means a couple things. It means there's still a lot of bargains to be had, tons of bargains in the cruise arena. And so you can still find a lot of things to do on the ship without it being overcrowded as well, right? Because the ships are not being fully booked at this point yet. And they're offering a lot of deals to get people onto the ships at this point. So cruising is still very much viable, and there's a lot of bargains to be had.
Is it safe?
I think that really depends on your comfort level, and that was another point of our discussion, which is people are really waiting. Cruises are like the final frontier in a way because you are in a confined space versus like where I was in Turks and Caicos 3 weeks ago at an on-land resort, beaches resort, and it was a whole different. You get all the same things you had at a cruise. 20 different eating options, lots of activities, all included in the price, but you're on land outside. So that has rebounded far more than cruises have rebounded.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it's all to your own level of personal comfort. Very much like masking, right? I mean, it's no longer mandated here where I live on even on planes, and
Right.
yet we still see a lot of people wearing masks for their own comfort.
For sure.
Um, let's stick with bargains for a second, because especially in these inflationary times, everybody is looking to have a little more fun for a little less money.
Mhm.
Where would you suggest, if you're looking to plan a trip, um, what do you need to do now to get the most value for your dollar, in terms of when you plan it,
Mhm.
where you decide to go, what kind of flexibility you're
Right.
willing to have in your choices?
Those are a lot of good questions. Let me start with where to go. So, beach destinations continue to be very popular among travelers. Therefore, they're among the most expensive. Hawaii right now is still super expensive. Florida is in huge demand, so it's not necessarily your cheapest choice right now. From my friends in the industry, I understand that Mexico, though, the beach destinations there are really still trying to draw people. So they're offering a lot of really good bargains to get people to go to Mexico. And there's a lot of beautiful beaches there. So if beaches are your thing and that's where you want to go, look to Mexico right now, is what I would say. And you're likely to get more bargains. But in general, when I'm sort of bargain shopping for flights, or when I know I want to go somewhere and I have a certain budget, I set up an alert. And that's one of my tips is, go to Scott's Cheap Flights or Skyscanner, any of these travel zoos, set up an alert for the destinations that you're hoping to go to. And then you can really pounce on the flights when they drop to rock bottom or just at a cheaper price point. And the other thing that, I would advise people is when you do see those cheaper prices, you do have to pounce. They come and go really quick right now. So you need to be ready to move on prices when you see them.
Does loyalty pay, in terms of airlines, in terms of hotels? Is it worth it to be loyal to a particular chain or a particular airline?
I mean, yes and no. I do have loyalty points and I do use them for things like upgrading seats or upgrading rooms. But if you find a cheaper price elsewhere beyond your brand or airline, there's no reason not to jump on that. My goal or point that I'd like everybody to take away is it's a case by case basis. You've always got to do your research. You've always got to shop around, and you don't have to stick with one airline or hotel brand.
Is there a better time of the year to travel, a less expensive time of the year? I mean, one of the nice things I would think about being retired is you're no longer subject to somebody's school vacations. You're no longer only able to go away when the office shuts down for Christmas.
That's a really good point. I recently wrote an article for Travel and Leisure about that very point, which is the pandemic has really blurred the lines of shoulder season, which for people who aren't familiar with that terminology, shoulder season is the time where it's right before or after a peak season of travel. So, right after spring break and before summer. And so often those times were great for bargain hunters like myself. You could go and get a serious discount and the weather was still pretty good. So it was reliable. But now with people working so remotely because of the pandemic, the lines of shoulder season have blurred. However, with all that said, what you said about schools is still very true, which is that many people are still beholden to the school calendar. So a lot of those shoulder season discounts can still be found, but the sort of time of shoulder season has stretched a little further because people are extending a little bit beyond the school vacations and, skipping out on school a little. But you can still go and find discounts at certain times of year, shoulder season being one of them.
My stepdaughter and her partner are remote workers. They neither of them have been in the office for quite some time, and so they just let us know that they will be going around the world for a year, and
Wow.
they're going to, yeah, they're going to do 3 months in Paris, 3 months in Argentina, 3 months in Mexico, and 3 months in Italy. And by the way, it's going to cost them less than living in the United States. They're going to actually save money by taking this trip. And so I'm wondering, as this world of
Mhm.
remote work and remote living opens up, what are your suggestions for people who are thinking, hey, I wouldn't mind spending 6 months of my retirement in a far-flung locale. I wouldn't mind even moving somewhere else.
Yeah. What's interesting? That leads me to another point, which is one of my friends at Fidelity said, think about your retirement and where you plan to relocate to during retirement, and think about your travel plans during retirements. And if you plan to, for instance, explore Europe all through retirement, then maybe you relocate to the East Coast where flights are cheaper to Europe so that you can hop back and forth much more cheaply than you could if you lived in California. So that's one point about, retirement and where to live if you plan to explore a lot. But then there's also lists all the time about the best places to go during retirement and to live during retirement. Portugal is always at the top of those lists for healthcare reasons and cost of living reasons. So I would do your research and find those lists about the top places to live during retirement, and think about, if I set up shop in Portugal, is this a good place for me to explore from some of the other places that I'd like to go to?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I would think that if you're making a decision about where you want to spend a considerable amount of time, whether it's months on end or whether it's a permanent residency, and you're older, healthcare goes right to the top of the list of
Oh,
important factors.
totally. And Medicare doesn't cover you abroad. So you would have to get Medigap, or you'd have to buy travel insurance that provides health coverage. And for retirees, that's something you need to think about and financially plan for ahead of time, which is, will my health insurance cover me? What are my pre-existing conditions? And you need to look, even when you're buying travel insurance with health coverage, look and see what pre-existing conditions they do and do not cover.
Natalie gave you a vote for Portugal, and she also suggests that if you go, you get currency from Case Bank since AAA is not doing it at this
Mhm.
time. So thank you,
Yeah.
Natalie, for that suggestion. Camilla says you can come to Brazil. The beaches are beautiful and can be cheap. From Chase Bank, that's where Natalie suggests.
And currency conversion is a good point that your viewer raised, because it is very expensive often once you get to the destination to convert your currency. So for retirees who are stretching their dollars, convert your currency before you leave the country if you can, or better yet, get a travel credit card and you won't pay currency conversion fees on your statement when you return home.
Yeah, and you can do a search for those credit cards with the best foreign exchange fees. I don't know them off the top of my head, but there are a number of lists that are published on that account. So
Absolutely.
so as we bring this conversation to a close, can you put it together for me? I mean, if you're a retiree and you're thinking, okay, yeah, I'm there, I've worked, I've saved, I really want to make sure I do this right. What are your top 3 or 4 tips for somebody who really wants to make that a memorable part of their next chapter?
Oh my gosh, I have been traveling for so long, and I think my tips on that front to make a trip memorable are not so much about money, but about like how you explore the destination. And so, for instance, for me, that means whenever I go somewhere, I always make sure to book experiences with locals. So there's a website, Tours with Locals. And so I'll book a walking tour with a local as opposed to the sort of big multinational TripAdvisor, Viator kind of things. But I really want to see a destination from a local's perspective.
I
And
love that.
yeah, I mean, I think it's so important, especially now when we talk about sort of regenerative travel and sustainable travel. You want your trip to benefit locals, and you want to think about the locals. So booking a tour with them is one way to do that and to support the locals. One of the other traditions I've had my entire travel writing career is what I call exploring a city during magic hour. And I've passed this tradition on to my son, which is I always make sure at least several times throughout my trip that I wake up at 6 or 7 in the morning and I do a sunrise walk, whether it's around a city or around a tropical destination. And you can see a destination so much differently as you watch it wake up in the morning when there's not as many people around. If you're exploring a natural destination like in Turks and Caicos, where I recently was, I would get up at 6 or 7 in the morning and watch nature wake up. And it's just a magical time to see a destination differently and experience it differently. And I always pass that tip on to people, like, take the time to look at a different destination from a variety of angles, so you really feel like you've immersed yourself in that place and its people.
Those are amazing tips, and such, not just for retirees, but I think they're fantastic tips for people at any age. This is fantastic. So if we want to get more information, Mia, on you, or we want to read your work, we want to go and dig into the stories that you've written for Travel and Leisure and other publications, what's the best way to do that?
Oh gosh, well, I have my own website, miataylorwriter.com, and you can find me there and how to communicate with me there. But then if you just Google Mia Taylor journalist, my travel and leisure bio page will come up. I write for Real Simple. I write for Parents. The Turks and Caicos story that I just returned from will be in Parents, so you just can Google that. But I'm always on those 4 brands: Travel and Leisure, Parents, Real Simple, and Better Homes and Gardens.
Amazing. And if you're looking for more information on all things retirement, making sure that you've got enough protected lifetime income to carry you wherever your journeys take you, you can find it on our website. It is protectedincome.org. For this conversation, protectedincome.org/Taylor. Mia, thank you so much for this. This was great.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next time.